She said it once, and suddenly, nothing between us would ever be the same. The first day he moved into the apartment, everything felt slightly off balance, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The young man, 25, earnest, observant, had expected a routine exchange. Sign the lease, get the keys, and move in. But when the landlady opened the door, the world tilted just a little. She was exactly 40, poised in a way that made every small movement feel deliberate, yet effortless. There was a quiet gravity about her, the kind that draws your gaze without demanding it. Her handshake was firm but warm, her fingers lingering a fraction longer than necessary. Not overt, not flirtatious, but memorable. Her smile was easy and polite, yet he sensed a hidden layer of private thoughts behind it, a soft vulnerability she allowed only glimpses of. As she guided him through the apartment, he noticed the way her hair caught the light when she tucked it behind her ear, the faint scent of something floral but understated. Every detail, he realized, seemed to exist on purpose, quietly asserting her presence. The apartment itself mirrored her personality. Clean, organized, but with touches of life that hinted at stories she hadn't told. A small stack of hardcover books on the windowsill, a cup with pens scattered across a desk, a well-worn scarf draped over a chair. Nothing flashy, yet every item felt intimate, lived in. As he moved through the rooms, his eyes occasionally met hers, and in those brief moments, there was a subtle exchange of curiosity, a silent question. Who are you, really? Even mundane gestures carried weight. When she handed him the keys, her fingers brushed his hand. The touch was light, almost accidental, but it lingered in his mind longer than it should have. When he shifted his bag to one shoulder, she offered a small, knowing smile. Not a laugh, but a warmth that suggested she understood him in a way no one else had yet. The sound of her voice, calm and even, was oddly grounding, the kind that made the city noise outside fade into the background. By the time he unpacked a few boxes, the young man found himself stealing glances at her, noticing the subtle ways she moved, the small, almost imperceptible gestures that revealed confidence tempered with restraint. There was no rush, no forcefulness, just the quiet gravity of someone used to navigating life on her own terms, and yet curious about the world she rarely let in. In that first hour, the air between them was charged with something unspoken. A subtle tension, not romantic yet, not even fully conscious, but alive. It was the kind of connection that doesn't require words, a spark ignited by proximity, gestures, and the quiet recognition of mutual awareness. He didn't know it yet, but in that brief encounter, the rules of his ordinary life had already begun to shift, and nothing would feel quite the same once the distance between them started to close. The next day, moving in felt less like a solo mission and more like stepping into someone else's carefully curated world. The young man had unpacked the essentials, but the apartment still smelled faintly of her presence. Polished wood, a hint of vanilla, and something uniquely her. She appeared in the kitchen, casual yet elegant, wearing a soft sweater and jeans that fit her without effort. She was putting a kettle on for tea, the simple motion somehow graceful, as though she had done it 1,000 times but never lost the poetry in the act. "Need some help with that?" he asked, holding a small box of utensils. He didn't expect her to answer, but she glanced at him, her eyes catching his with a subtle curiosity that made his chest tighten. "You can if you want," she said, not insisting but leaving an opening, a small bridge between their worlds. As they moved through the kitchen together, there was a rhythm to their actions. His hands reached for a cup just as hers did, and for a heartbeat, their fingers brushed. It was fleeting, accidental, yet it left a warmth lingering longer than it should have. He caught himself noticing little things, the way her lips curved in a soft, almost private smile, the gentle tilt of her head when she considered something, the quiet confidence she carried even in the simplicity of making tea. They settled at the small kitchen table, sitting a few inches apart. The proximity wasn't forced, but it felt intimate, like two people discovering a shared rhythm without realizing it. She talked about the building, casual stories about tenants past and present, but there was depth in the way she spoke. He listened more than he spoke, absorbing the subtle nuances in her tone, the pauses where her eyes drifted away, and the way she gestured with delicate hands, leaving impressions on him he couldn't name yet. A minor household mishap broke the formal rhythm. A cupboard hinge came loose. She laughed softly, not in frustration, but in quiet resignation. "I swear, this place has its quirks," she admitted, her shoulders relaxing. He instinctively leaned in to help, guiding the hinge back into place. Their hands touched again briefly, a shared warmth that made him aware of the small space separating them. It was in these domestic, unremarkable moments that the tension started to bloom. Not a tension of drama, but of awareness. Noticing, appreciating, hesitating. He found himself lingering a second too long near her as she washed dishes, noticing the subtle sway of her hair, the way her sweater fell just right on her shoulders. She noticed him noticing, though she didn't comment. Only a faint, almost imperceptible look that held questions without words. By the end of the afternoon, something had shifted. They had shared tea, laughter, and small touches that carried weight far beyond the mundane. He realized the apartment no longer felt like just a place to live. It felt like an entry point into her world, fragile and inviting. And though neither of them acknowledged it aloud, the silent tension, the unspoken curiosity and admiration, had grown unmistakably. In this quiet domestic intimacy, the first threads of connection were woven. The subtle, careful dance of proximity, touch, and observation had begun, laying the foundation for something neither fully understood yet. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew that stepping into this space was no longer just about moving in. It was about stepping into a story that had only just begun. It wasn't dramatic, not at first. There was no sudden confession or moment of reckless abandon. Instead, it arrived in the small, quiet ways that made him notice her not just as a landlady, but as a person with layers he hadn't seen before. The young man, still acclimating to the apartment, to her presence, to the subtle tension that seemed to hum in the air, found himself witnessing the cracks in her otherwise composed exterior. One evening, while he was fixing a leaky faucet under her guidance, she sighed softly, leaning against the counter, and admitted, almost to herself, "Some days, it just feels like everything's too much." Her voice wasn't dramatic. It was low, almost vulnerable, like a note played softly in a song only he could hear. He looked up at her, startled at first. Not by the words themselves, but by the softness behind them, a glimpse into a part of her life she rarely let anyone see. He said nothing immediately, only offered a quiet, attentive presence. She glanced at him, her eyes catching his in a fleeting moment, and for a second, the room seemed suspended. He felt a desire to comfort her, not in a heroic or romanticized way, but simply in a human way, a desire to be close without overstepping, to share the quiet weight of her moment. He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, and the contact was fleeting, intentional, and full of unspoken reassurance. She didn't pull away, only let her shoulders relax fractionally, letting him sense the trust being offered without words. They spent the evening sitting in the living room, the faucet forgotten, sipping tea she had prepared while the city outside dimmed into quiet evening hums. She talked about small disappointments, the difficulty of balancing work and life, the loneliness that crept in sometimes despite a life full of accomplishments. He listened more than he spoke, letting her words hang in the space between them, punctuated only by the soft clink of ceramic cups and the faint rustle of the curtains in the breeze. As she spoke, he noticed the subtle cues of vulnerability. The way she pressed her lips together when thinking, the gentle frown that briefly crossed her forehead, the way her hands flexed in her lap when words failed. She wasn't seeking pity, just recognition, a witness to her private, unspoken moments. And in that quiet attention, a deeper bond began to form. By the time the night had fully settled, the young man realized that his fascination with her was no longer just curiosity or admiration. It had begun to intertwine with empathy and a protective tenderness. Yet, it was not romantic in the obvious sense. It was the intimacy of emotional proximity, the closeness of shared vulnerability, the silent acknowledgement that some part of her had let him in. Even when she moved to tidy up, he lingered near, aware of the subtle warmth in the space between them. She noticed, subtly, in the soft tilt of her head, in the slight, appreciative smile that curved her lips. In those moments, it became clear. The connection between them was growing, delicate but undeniable. And though neither spoke of desire aloud, the foundation for something far more intimate than simple neighborly acquaintance had been laid, carefully, quietly, in the gentle spaces of shared vulnerability. After weeks of routine, the young man began to notice the rhythm of the apartment in ways he hadn't before. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floorboards, even the subtle tapping of her fingers against a mug, all became part of a quiet orchestra in which they moved together. Their interactions had settled into a pattern, domestic yet intimate, marked by small gestures that carried weight far beyond their apparent simplicity. It was during one of these ordinary afternoons that the tension between them became almost tangible. He was seated on the edge of the sofa, half reading a book while she rearranged a few papers on the coffee table. Their shoulders brushed fleetingly as she leaned forward, and both of them froze for a heartbeat, a subtle, electric acknowledgement of proximity that neither wanted to verbalize. He could feel the warmth of her body, faint but undeniable, lingering in the space where their hands had almost met. Their conversation remained casual, about nothing important. A new neighbor, a funny story from the building's past. But the pauses between words were heavy with unspoken questions. Every glance was weighted, every smile measured. He caught her looking at him once, not with judgment, but with something more complex. Curiosity, recognition, a quiet evaluation of him that left his heart slightly off balance. She looked away quickly, brushing her hair behind her ear, but the tension didn't dissipate. It merely hovered, patient and deliberate. Even the way they moved around the apartment carried intimacy. He reached to open a window just as she did, and their hands nearly touched on the latch. She hesitated, a faint, almost imperceptible pause in her movement, and he felt the almost unbearable pull of that near contact. Neither spoke, neither moved away. The apartment had become a landscape of silent communication. The brush of arms, the shared warmth across a narrow space, the careful choreography of proximity that spoke louder than words ever could. It wasn't longing in the overt sense, but something subtler. An awareness of what could happen, a fascination with closeness, a recognition of the emotional electricity that pulsed quietly between them. Each gesture, each look, each pause became a negotiation, an unspoken agreement to explore the space between curiosity and desire without crossing the line they both knew existed. By evening, the quiet tension had deepened into something almost tangible. He lingered near the kitchen as she washed dishes, their reflections overlapping in the sink's metallic surface. He noticed the faint rise and fall of her shoulders, the way her hair caught the light, the softness of her expression when she hummed to herself. She, in turn, seemed to sense his attention without acknowledgement, moving deliberately, gracefully, aware of the silent gravity that existed in the shared air. The apartment had become a stage for subtle intimacy, a theater of gestures and glances where both were actors in a delicate play. Neither wanted to speak the feelings aloud. Not yet, but both were aware of the growing pull, the quiet closeness that threatened to shift the nature of their relationship forever. And in that suspended moment, with the city's evening lights casting soft shadows around them, the young man realized that they had passed a point of no return. Something had shifted, something unspoken and fragile, that promised the eventual acknowledgement of the emotions simmering beneath the surface. The apartment felt different that evening. Not louder, not more chaotic, but charged with a subtle electricity neither of them could ignore. They had fallen into a routine over the weeks, a comfortable rhythm of domestic life, tea, shared spaces, small gestures of care. But tonight, there was a quiet weight in the air, a sense that the rules of their relationship were about to be rewritten. It began with something small, almost accidental. She was sitting at the kitchen table, the soft lamp casting a warm glow over her face, and he noticed her pause mid-task, hands stilling over a notebook she had been scribbling in. Her eyes, usually guarded and composed, flicked up to meet his, and there it was, a fleeting vulnerability that spoke louder than words. He felt his chest tighten, a mix of admiration, curiosity, and something more dangerous, longing. "You seem distracted," he said softly, trying to mask the quickened beat of his own heart. She let out a small, almost nervous laugh. "Maybe I am," she admitted, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "Sometimes I wonder if saying things out loud changes everything." The words were casual, yet heavy with meaning, and he felt a subtle shiver run through him at the implication. The unspoken tension between them, curiosity, hesitation, and the hint of desire, was suddenly impossible to ignore. They moved around the kitchen in a dance of routine, but every gesture carried weight. He reached for the sugar, and their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away immediately, only let the contact linger a second longer than necessary, as if testing the air between them. His gaze caught hers, and for the briefest instant, the world outside the apartment seemed to vanish, leaving only the warmth and intensity of that shared moment. The conversation drifted naturally toward life, relationships, and regrets. She spoke of moments when she had wished she'd taken chances, when she had let fear dictate her choices. He listened, offering quiet reassurance, a steady presence. His hand brushed against hers again as he passed her a cup of tea, and this time neither recoiled. The air between them was thick with anticipation, with the unsaid acknowledgement that what they felt could no longer remain purely unspoken. A sudden knock on the door startled them both, and they laughed softly at the interruption, the tension breaking momentarily. But when the noise faded, the quiet intimacy returned, stronger than before. He realized that the conversation, and the lingering touches, the subtle glances, the shared silence, had brought them to a precipice. Something needed to be said. Finally, as she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear, she met his eyes fully and said, "Once we say it out loud, everything changes." There was a pause, heavy and deliberate, and he felt the full weight of the words sink in. It wasn't just a statement. It was a warning, an invitation, a declaration, and for the first time, he understood that the foundation of their connection, the shared glances, the gentle touches, the quiet understanding, had built toward this precise moment. Neither spoke immediately after. They simply sat, inches apart, hearts and breaths measured, suspended in a quiet storm of anticipation. In that charged silence, both knew that the unspoken had grown too heavy to ignore. And in that space, small, warm, intimate, the story between them was on the cusp of a transformation that neither could undo, nor would want to. The apartment was quiet that night, the city outside a soft blur of distant lights and occasional car horns. Inside, the air seemed thicker, warmer, charged with an anticipation that neither of them could fully name. For weeks, for months, they had skirted the edges of something unspoken. Fleeting touches, lingering glances, pauses heavy with meaning. Now, the weight of it pressed against them, demanding acknowledgement. He found her standing by the window, one hand resting lightly on the sill, the other brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The lamplight caught the subtle curve of her face, highlighting the softness of her expression and the quiet intensity in her eyes. He swallowed, feeling the familiar pull in his chest, the mixture of admiration, nervousness, and longing that had become almost unbearable. He began, then stopped. Words felt insufficient, incapable of containing the swirl of emotions he had kept tucked inside. She turned to him, her gaze steady, inviting, yet tinged with hesitation. "We can't keep pretending this is nothing," she said softly, the sentence a careful bridge across the distance they had maintained for so long. He stepped closer, the floorboards creaking underfoot, and they were suddenly painfully aware of the narrow space between them. Not just physical space, the emotional space, the years of experience and caution she carried, and the youthful earnestness he brought in return. Every detail of her presence drew him in. The faint scent of her perfume, the gentle slope of her shoulders, the warmth radiating from her hand as it hovered near his own. "I think I've been waiting for this," he admitted quietly. "Waiting to hear you say it." His hand lifted, hesitated, and finally brushed against hers. Not clumsy, not intrusive, but deliberate. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers intertwined with his for a fraction of a second, a gesture heavy with meaning. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying vulnerability she rarely allowed anyone to see. "Once we say it out loud, everything changes," she repeated, this time with weight and intention. The words were no longer a warning. They were an invitation, a truth neither could deny. He nodded, and the tension that had hovered between them for weeks seemed to shift, condensing into a single moment of clarity. They moved together slowly, naturally, as if guided by an invisible rhythm. His hand found her arm, a soft touch meant to reassure and anchor them both. She leaned slightly into him, and the warmth of that small closeness, their bodies near, not pressed, just aware, sent a shiver of recognition through him. Their eyes met, unflinching, holding everything they had both felt but never spoken. And in that quiet apartment, amid the muted hum of the city, the unspoken became real. They did not need words for what they both understood. The attraction, the admiration, the desire for connection. A hand on the shoulder, a brush of hair behind the ear, a lingering look that said more than dialogue ever could. All of it confirmed that the boundary they had maintained was now crossed, willingly, tenderly, and safely. For the first time, the young man realized that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. And she understood the same truth. Their lives had shifted irrevocably, their connection transformed from quiet curiosity to something palpably alive, tender, and impossible to ignore. Morning came softly, spilling through the curtains in golden streams that made the apartment feel intimate and alive. For the first time in weeks, perhaps months, the young man felt entirely present, aware not only of the space around him but of the quiet intimacy he now shared with her. The city outside continued its usual hum, but inside, time seemed suspended, stretching in warmth and light. She was in the kitchen, preparing tea with the same casual grace that had first caught his attention, but something had shifted. Her movements were unhurried, deliberate, and there was a softness in her expression, a quiet confidence tempered with vulnerability that he had come to recognize and cherish. When she looked up, their eyes met, and the familiar tension of their early encounters was gone, replaced by a calm acknowledgement of what had changed between them. "Morning," he said, voice low, careful. She smiled, the curve of her lips carrying both amusement and warmth, a private acknowledgement of the night that had passed. She set a cup before him, and their fingers brushed lightly as he reached for it. A gesture now natural, intimate, and full of meaning. Neither flinched, neither pulled away. They settled at the table, the silence comfortable, rich with unspoken understanding. He noticed the small details once more, the way her hair caught the sunlight, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the warm air, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. He felt a surge of affection, quiet but profound, for this woman who had once seemed untouchable in her composure, and who now shared a tenderness that felt both fragile and enduring. "I never thought I could feel this," he said softly, letting the words hang in the air. She reached across the table, placing her hand over his. The contact was gentle, grounding, an affirmation of shared presence. Her fingers lingered for a moment, and he felt the warmth radiate from her touch, a quiet reassurance that they were both here, together, and it was enough. She squeezed his hand lightly and leaned back, a subtle, private smile on her face. "Neither did I," she admitted. "But I'm glad we're here." The sentence was simple, yet it carried weight, an acknowledgement of risk, of vulnerability, and of a connection that had grown stronger for having been tested. Their morning continued in quiet companionship. Tea was sipped slowly, breakfast shared in comfortable silence, each gesture deliberate and attentive. They moved around each other in a familiar rhythm, brushing shoulders, exchanging looks that lingered just long enough to make hearts flutter, but not so long as to feel overwhelming. Every action, every glance, was a confirmation of the bond they had built, tender, respectful, and profoundly human. By the time the sunlight softened into mid-morning warmth, a sense of permanence had settled over them. Nothing had been rushed. Nothing had been forced. Their connection, born of curiosity, deepened through vulnerability, and solidified in quiet confession, had reached a point of understanding. They were together, aware of the changes in their relationship, and ready to face whatever came next. Not with fear, but with shared trust and an unspoken promise of care. And as he reached for her hand once more, she let him hold it, a gentle intertwining of fingers that symbolized more than words ever could. In that simple gesture, in the warmth of their shared presence, both understood the truth. Whatever the future held, they had crossed a threshold, and life would never feel ordinary again. Their story had changed, and so had they, together quietly and beautifully. If this slow burn story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to follow the journey of more heartfelt romances. Share your thoughts below. Have you ever experienced a connection that changed everything?